Hello and welcome, coders. Today we are going to be learning SwiftUI, or at least starting to. So this will be the first video in that series. SwiftUI is basically a declarative framework as an alternative to UIKit, which is a more drag and drop based interface builder for iOS and Mac. So let's get started. You should have Xcode. If you don't already, download it. And then just click File, New, Project. Go ahead and stick with App. And then product name, we are just going to go with Learning Swift UI Part 1 Basics. So you can name whatever you want. And then make sure the interface is SwiftUI, not Storyboard, and the language is Swift. No need for core data or unit tests. So just click Next, and then click Create. No need for Git repository. Okay, so if you haven't used SwiftUI before, and or you have used storyboards before, you'll notice some differences. First is, what is this thing? This is basically a real-time canvas view. That's what they call this window. And basically, if you make any changes to the code, you don't have to run a simulator or anything. It just updates automatically. So that's kind of cool. So let's go ahead and delete all of this right here. Oh wait, it's gonna yell at us. So let's keep the VStack there. So basically, this struct right here kind of controls any parameters you want to throw into the content view. So if there's variables up here, so you have like a var word of type string, then you could specify that in the preview if you wanted to say a specific word. But we don't actually have that displayed in the UI here yet, so that's not going to apply for right now. So another first thing you'll notice is this first struct up here, and it's called the content view, and this is of type SwiftUI view. So if you were to create a new file, it would be this file. That's what this is basically, and this is kind of like a view controller in UIKit if you've used that, and that's basically what either of those is just a screen that you would see on your iPhone during the app. It's just a single view. So let's get started. You guys probably don't even know what a VStack is. So basically, there are 3 different types of stack views in SwiftUI. There's VStack, HStack, and ZStack. These are all stack views. If you've used UIKit, you should know what that is. Basically, it's a view that holds other UI elements and arranges them based on the type of stack view it is. So in a VStack, the V stands for vertical, which means it's vertically arranged. HStack is horizontally arranged UI elements, and ZStack basically just means they're layered on top of each other. And you can basically think that as a z-axis if you're thinking XYZ coordinates. So let's go ahead and show you what that looks like. So right now we have a VStack. Also notice that it's required when you conform to a SwiftUI view that you do this var body sum view right here. And then in order to display anything in the middle, you have to start with something, whether that's a VStack or a navigation view or any number of elements. But let's start with VStack so you know what that is. The first thing we'll want to do is create a label. And they're not actually called labels in SwiftUI. That's what they're called in UIKit. But in UIKit, you would basically find a label and drag it in there, or you would create it programmatically. But in SwiftUI, it's code, which keeps things all in one place and easier to keep track of. So in order to create a label, all we do is type the word text and then just say what we want to say. So we could just say hello. You see right here, it just pops up in the middle. And then to add modifiers to this, all we do is press enter, period, and then we can add whatever we want. We can do font and do dot title, and that changes the font of it. It's crazy how easy it is. A whole plethora of things we could do. We could do foreground color and make it red if we wanted to. Anyways, this text right here is the first element in this vertical stack. You can't really see what that does right now. So if we were to change this to an H stack or a Z stack, there's only one element. So it's going to be centered in the screen because the stack view basically covers the whole screen. So it's not going to look any different from one another. But once you start adding multiple elements, that's when you notice the differences between these different stacks, these different stack views, rather. So let's add a view, like just kind of like a shape below hello. And if this were UIKit, you would drag a UI view in and add a bunch of constraints. That's how you would do it. But the cool thing about SwiftUI is you just think in your mind of the shape that you want there, and then you just type it. So rectangle, for instance, and then you use the parentheses to instantiate it, and boom, there's an enormous rectangle right here. If you were to type circle, it would also make a circle, but we're going to stick with a rectangle for now. And you'll notice, the first thing you notice, it's really big, so we'll want to make it smaller. So by default, it's going to go all the way across, which is fine for us. But if you want to change the height, you just do dot frame, and then you type in height, and we'll say 50, and then boom, you have a rectangle of height 50 that is directly below hello. We can also do a foreground color, and we'll just make it yellow. So this is a VStack. It's just elements vertically arranged on top of each other. This is where we can see the differences a lot more clearly. If we change this to an H stack for horizontal, now they're horizontally aligned next to each other. And if we change it to a Z stack, they're on top of each other. And the element at the top in the code is actually going to be at the back. So we're going to want to Command X the text, and then Command V below the rectangle in the code so that it actually appears on top of it. That is the difference between VStack, HStack, and ZStack, the basic initial thing that you want to know when working with SwiftUI. So before we get into lists, let's talk about why use SwiftUI over UIKit. And there's a couple reasons. The first is if you're using UIKit and you have the right pane open, say you wanted to like add a corner radius to this rectangle, you could either do it in code over here, or you could go to the interface builder and add it as sort of a property in this right pane over here. But when you do one, you have to remember where you did it, because it doesn't, if you add it here, it doesn't add it to the code. And if you add it to the code, it doesn't add it over here to be visible. But with SwiftUI, if you go to rectangle and you just kind of click in here, and then you go over and go where it says add modifier, click that. All these options for how you can modify this rectangle pop up, and you could type corner radius, for instance, just tap it, and then it's over here in the code reflected automatically. If you change it to, let's say, 12, you see the little corners over here, then it automatically reflects over here too. And if you change it here, it does it to the code as well. So you don't have to remember where you change things because it's all connected. So that is one nice thing about SwiftUI. The second thing that is really nice is that SwiftUI moves away from the old style and goes into what we call reactive programming. And what that essentially means is a lot of the work that you would have to do to manually recall things, such as manually reloading, say like a table view, and having to type in table view.reload data every time you change something, you don't really have to do that in SwiftUI by using certain property modifiers, which I'm going to show you while we make this list, which is what we're doing right now. So a SwiftUI list is basically like a table view in UIKit. Another way to think of a practical application is if you go to iPhone settings is basically in a list format. It's basically a list of items displayed in a vertical row, right? And this is very useful. There's a lot of applications for this, whether that's a literal to-do list or just anything where you want to display things vertically and sort of automate through the display of all those things because they're all pretty similar. You don't have to write a separate line of code for every single element that you're displaying out of an array. So let's list. If you get that reference, then I'm proud of you. So the way you create a list is you just type in the word list and then have this curly braces right here, and then it pushes everything to the top, and this list basically covers the rest of this area. But we don't have anything in it yet. So what we need now is an object that we're going to use to pass into the list. We're going to pass that object as an array. That array needs to conform to something called identifiable, which I'll show you. So our object is going to be a car array. So we're going to do struct car, create up here outside of the content view. And in order to use an array of cars in a list, it has to conform to identifiable. And what does that mean? It's really simple. Basically, it just means that it needs to have an ID property. And this could be an int, or it could be a UUID, which is a universal unique identifier. That's what we're going to use. That way we don't have to manually generate our IDs every time we initialize a car, because we want the system to do more work for us. So a car, we're just going to have a make of type string and a model of type string. And yeah, that's all we really need for this example. So now let's create this array, right? Let's do var cars of array with type car, and we're going to set it equal to a new instance. We're going to initialize all the objects just within the array for example purposes. So we're going to do car parentheses, and you'll see right here it wants us to input it ID, a UUID. But we don't want to do that every time. We want it to do it automatically. So what we can do is go up here to the car struct and just do equals UUID and then parentheses to initialize. And now every time we create a new car, it automatically generates a unique identifier so that it conforms to identifiable, and we don't really have to do any work. Make, we'll do Tesla. And model, if you don't know cars very well and you get confused between make and model, just study Teslas for like 2 minutes because all of their models begin with the word model. So pretty easy way to memorize that if you're really car illiterate. So let's do 2 more. Make sure you add commas in between in the array, and we're going to do the model 3 and the model X. So now we have this array of cars and we want to display it in this list. Well, how do we do that? So in UIKit, you would have to do, the list would be a table view. You would have to make table view cells, and then you would have to conform to table view data source and delegate, and do self row with identifier at index path, and all of this stuff just to display like a word or two in a couple cells. It's ridiculous. But in SwiftUI, all you have to do is have list here, do the parentheses, and then type cars. That's the array that we're taking in from up here. And then this is a closure. So you type in car, which is a single object in this cars array, space in, and then all you do is, okay, I want my cells to just have the model. That's it. So we just do text to create a label. Then you type in car, this object, dot model. And boom, our entire list is automatically generated right there with no protocol delegate patterns, nothing like that. It's so simple, so powerful, and really easily customizable. So that's pretty crazy, but we're not done yet. That's not even the beginning of the power of SwiftUI. So let's say we want to add a new element, right, to this array. If this were UIKit, we would add some element either by pressing a button or something, and then we would have to do table view dot reload data in order for it to reload that, and have to make sure that the number of rows is updated. Otherwise it'll crash and be like, oh, the number of rows isn't equal to the number of items in the array. So it's pretty complicated, but let's see how we do it in SwiftUI, right? So first we need a function that adds a car. So we'll do func add car, and we're just going to add a roadster. So roadster equals car, parentheses, make is going to be a Tesla, model is going to be a roadster. The name of our array is cars. So we're going to do cars dot append roadster, and it's going to append that object to the end of this array when this function is triggered. But you'll see we have this error basically saying that it can't mutate this array up here. So how do we fix that? We're going to use what's called a state, at state, that's a prefix, and it's a property modifier. And basically what it does is insane. Are you ready for this? It makes it so that anytime this data in this property is modified, all of the UI that takes in that data is automatically reloaded. So in this case, it's going to be this list, but we could have it in a million different things and it would reload all of it. We wouldn't have to call tableview.reload data or refresh the view manually anywhere. All we need to do is add this property modifier and then just modify the data and it'll do it automatically. And that's part of what's called reactive programming, which is very powerful. So how do we trigger this function? We're going to do it in sort of like a button type thing. So how would you do like a button or tap gesture in UIKit, right? What you would do is that you'd either drag in a button, add an IB action, and do all that stuff, or you would add a tap gesture in view.load to the object, and then you would have an Objective-C function to trigger what that is, right? You get used to it, but there's a better way, and it's called SwiftUI. So what you do in SwiftUI is, let's say I want to tap this rectangle up here. And when that happens, I want to trigger this function, which that should then update the data, which will then automatically refresh the UI, right? A lot of work behind the scenes here. All we do is we go to this rectangle, go to the end of these modifiers that we added, and we do dot on tap gesture. And then all we do is type the function or whatever we want to happen when the rectangle is tapped. That's literally it. So now all I should have to do is tap this button, which should then add this object to this array, which will then automatically update the list on the screen. So let's see if it works. Oh my goodness. It works. So that's insane. That is insanely powerful. And the amount of work that you can do so much faster in SwiftUI is it's crazy. So very powerful stuff. The reason it's creating seems like all these duplicates is because it's initializing a new version of this car. Like they're not actually the same object because remember, it's generating a unique ID every time. So these are all unique instances in memory. So that's why it's doing all those. But crazy stuff, right? This is what you should have learned, as well as the general structure and all that stuff. However, we're going to go into a little bit of best practices because it's good to always be into those, right? So what we can see right now is we have this model for a car up here, this struct car, in the same file as our content view. We do not want that. For bigger projects, you want, and really for any project, just for best practices, you want to have all these in separate files, generally. Obviously, the content view preview and the content view have to be in the same file in order to work. But for this model, we don't want it here. That's bad. Don't do that. Don't get used to doing that. So typically in SwiftUI, you want to work in architecture called MVVM. Basically what that stands for is model, view, and view model. So if you remember, the car basically defines an object. And it's a model for that data type that we created. So that would be a model. A view would be if we abstracted all of this out because our body got so enormous, or we were switching between different views within this content view programmatically. We would want to take those out, Command X them out of there, and then put them in the view folder, just to keep everything clean and organized. And then view model, we didn't create in this video because that is for slightly more complicated projects. They're honestly not, you don't have to get that complicated to start using view models. And it's good to start using them when you can, but in this project we didn't use it. So that folder will be empty and throwing errors because we took out the car, we command X'd it. So let's put it where it belongs in the model folder, even though it's called, in the model folder. Make sure it's a Swift file. SwiftUI view is this over here. Well, it's not this, is a canvas. But SwiftUI view is a content view essentially, and it's basically every screen that you would see. So we want just a generic Swift file. Next, make sure you name it the name of the struct you created, which is car for us. And then in here, you just throw in that struct, and then this will realize that it does still exist because it reads all the files in this target. And yeah, everything was fine. So that is a little bit of the best practices for us. And in the next video, we're going to go over navigation, sort of switching to separate screens and passing data to those screens. And we're going to see how much easier that is in SwiftUI as well. So I'll see you in the next video.